Welcome to B'madzaji Ginonindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. In this episode, we'll be learning more about Kōganossawin, the collective body established by Anishinaabeg First Nations and Anishinaabeg child well-being agencies to support and enhance the delivery of child, youth, and family well-being programs and services. In previous episodes of the podcast, we spoke with Duke Pelletier, the Anishinaabeg Nation's Children's Commissioner, and Stan Cloud, the Director of the Anishinaabeg Nation's Social Development Department and Kōganossawin. Today's guest is Liana Farr, in-house legal counsel with the Anishinaabeg Nation. She has assisted the Social Development Department and Kōganossawin with legal matters related to child well-being and outcomes from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. She was also part of the development of the Anishinaabeg Nation Circle Process. The Circle Process is a culturally based, voluntary, child-centered, confidential circle that supports Anishinaabeg families that are involved or at risk of becoming involved in child protection matters and helps them create a plan that addresses child and youth well-being issues. This service is coordinated by the Circle Process Regional Facilitators at Kōganossawin and can be accessed at any step of the care process. Liana Farr and I chatted over Zoom shortly after the Child Wellbeing Working Group quarterly meeting and the Kōganossawin Annual General Meeting in Sault Ste. Marie last fall. So, miigwech Liana for being with us here today on B'madzaji Ginonindwa. Liana Farr, in-house legal counsel with the Anishinaabeg Nation, and you have been helping to do some work with the Social Development Department and Kōganossawin. So miigwech for joining us today.
Hello, Lisa. Miigwech for having me.
Miigwech. So, Liana, can you tell us a little bit about yourself to start with?
Okay, so I'm Anishinaabe Kwe from Temagami First Nation. I'm Temiagama Anishinaabe. I am a legal counsel for the Anishinaabeg Nation. We have 3 in-house legal counsel at the Anishinaabeg Nation, and I've been with the Anishinaabeg Nation for about 8 years, maybe 9 years now. It's been a long time, and I love my job and my position and helping our First Nations with any of the legal matters that we are faced with and the challenges. And I practiced in the area of family law before I came over to the Anishinaabeg Nation, and a huge part of my practice then was in the area of child protection. And so when I came over to the Anishinaabeg Nation, our social director at that time, Adrienne Pelletier, she wanted a lot of help in her department, legal guidance and help with regards to development of this very important circle process and other child well-being related legal issues. And so I've been helping the Social Development Department, Kōganossawin, ever since I first started at the Anishinaabeg Nation, and it's been an amazing role to play. I assist our Social Development Department and Kōganossawin with various child well-being related matters, legal matters, working a lot with regards to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, Caring Society versus Canada case and the outcomes from that, and updating our First Nations about the case and how it's proceeding and the funding that's rolling out, and anything to do with that is a huge part of my work for social development. But the circle process was another major project that we had worked on together.
Miigwech. So you're bringing this legal background, you said, in child protection. So how maybe if we start with talking about what is the circle process within Koganasuin.
Okay. So the circle process is really meant to provide a safe space for everyone that might be involved in a child well-being challenge, or if the family is facing struggles with regards to caring for their children or youth, or there's some kind of challenge or dispute that arises within a family and it's affecting and impacting the children and the youth in the family. The circle process is meant to be a safe space to bring everyone involved together to help to hopefully resolve those disputes and those challenges in an Anishinaabe way, and really plan to support the children and the youth that are involved. The circle process can be used as a preventionary measure, and if child protection is involved, it can be used there as well. But we wanted to make sure that this process is flexible to be able to be used in both types of situations, prevention and protection, because we really want to make sure that if there's a family that's struggling and having issues, even before a child welfare agency becomes involved, that this sort of process could be used before that happens. We don't want our children and families to become involved with a protection agency. And so it is an open and flexible process where it can be used to help a family out and to provide supports and services and dispute resolution type supports to a family that might be struggling even before an agency becomes involved. So, for example, if there is a prevention worker within the First Nation that works with the children and the youth and the families, and they see or know, because our First Nations are the experts and they know our children and youth and families the best. If they see that there's some kind of issue happening that might be a challenge for a family, and it could be going in a way that might result in child protection becoming involved, they might be able to approach that family and have some support from this type of process used at that point as well, before it gets to a child protection issue. And I think that's why this process is so important, because it is flexible to be used for any of those types of issues, whether it's protection or prevention. And that's really important for us.
Okay, that's good. Just to clarify, is it only available to families on First Nations on a reserve, or is it available externally also for families who may be in urban, rural, or other settings off reserve?
Yeah, so a main principle of the Anishinaabe Nation Child Wellbeing Law is that we support our children, youth, and families regardless of where they may reside. And that's a really key piece that we heard from the Child Wellbeing Working Group that helped develop this process and gave us the guidance on the development of the circle process, was that it needs to be flexible to be able to support our children, youth, and families regardless where they reside. So that is on and off reserve.
Okay, so it could be a worker or other kind of person who's working with a family, or could a family also self-refer themselves to this process to access some assistance?
Yes. So it could be the family members that contact the circle process to find out if it might be something that they want to pursue. It could be a First Nation representative, such as a band representative or prevention worker, like I had mentioned earlier, family well-being worker. It could be an agency and one of the Indigenous affiliated agencies that contacts, but it's really a voluntary process. And so that's one of the guiding principles of the process, is that it's voluntary. And so everybody that's involved, particularly, the family that's involved and the First Nation, it's got to be voluntary for them. And they have to really choose to use the circle process. And so that's an important aspect of it as well.
That's good. Can you tell me more about the guiding principles of the circle process?
We know that the mainstream courts and mainstream dispute resolution processes are not kind to our people, our families. It's not an easy process. It's not a culturally appropriate process for our families to have to go through those mainstream processes. And so the Child Wellbeing Working Group were the ones that had provided the Social Development Department, Kogonaswin, with the guidance to develop this very important circle process. And they really wanted it to be Anishinaabe developed, roots within the Anishinaabe culture. And so it was really developed from there. And they were key and crucial in the guiding principles that were developed. And so if you want me to go through some of those, there's about 11 or 12 guiding
Wow.
principles.
Okay.
But they felt that these are really important, and it's important however or wherever the circle process is being implemented, that it always take into account these guiding principles. And one of the main ones at the very start is that the children and youth are always at the center of the circle process. And there are aspects in the circle process to be able to include children and youth in the actual circle process, depending on their age and their capacity and whether they want to be included. But there are supports there available to actually include the children or youth directly. But even if they don't want to attend in the circle process directly, they still have a voice, whether it's through elders or the First Nation helping out to involve them. There's always the children and youth being at the center of the process, and always the reminder that the planning and the supports that are needed are there for those children and youth that are at the center. And so that's a core guiding principle. We also heard that circle teachings are needed. We know that the circle is a very safe space and sacred space for our Anishinaabe people. And that's part of a guiding principle of the circle process as well, is that anybody that's coming into that circle process and those circles that are being used need to be mindful and respectful of that sacred space. For example, confidentiality and allowing people to really share and speak their minds and their truths and those kinds of things in the circle, and respecting that, to not have those things repeated outside of the circle, right? That's an important aspect. And we also know we're going to use the medicines and those types of things within the circle. And our elder would call on the ancestors to come in and help guide the circle process as well and keep everybody safe and those kinds of things. And it's important for the circle process to have that, and for everybody to be mindful and respectful of our Anishinaabe ways in this circles process. And so that's a key aspect and guiding principle as well. And then there's 7 grandfather teachings. That's one of the main guiding principles, is that we always use those 7 grandfather teachings: Zagadewen, love; Debwewen, truth; Minaden Demoen, respect; Nabokawin, wisdom; Debondenzawin, humility; Wekwadzawin, minwa, honesty; Akewe did win, bravery. I hope I said all of those correctly. Those are the 7 grandfather teachings, and we were advised by the Child Wellbeing Working Group that those teachings must also be represented within the circle process. Anishinaabe life teachings, and the life stages. It's important for those to remember that we're all in different stages in our lives, and to be respectful of that. voluntary process. That's a huge guiding principle. We can't have the circle process mandated onto anybody to be involved. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a totally voluntary process, and it has to be that way to be able to be successful. I think people have to want to be part of this and want to be involved in the process. And so that's what we heard as well, is that it needs to be voluntary. It needs to ensure that there's connection to the child or youth's community and culture. And so it can't just be a circle process that's happening without that connection to the First Nations community and culture. And the process does directly involve representatives from the First Nation and elders from the First Nations, and also respectful of the family and the children and youth, their wants and needs in the process. A key part of the guiding principles is flexibility to maneuver, to know, to implement the circle process in a way that meets the needs of the children, the youth, the family, the parents, and the First Nation. So it's got to be flexible to meet the needs of everybody that's involved, and that's important. Neutrality is another really important guiding principle of the process. We have to make sure that we're coming into the process in a non-judgmental way and being very open to all sorts of the challenges that are going on, and also in a non-judgmental way, and then also open to various different ways of resolving a dispute and ways that could support the family, right? There could be numerous ways that come out of the circle that we want to support the family, or the family wants the supports, and we have to be open to all different ways and avenues to provide those supports. Confidentiality, like I mentioned earlier, is a key and crucial aspect of the circle process and the sacred space that we're providing, and also the importance for everyone to be heard. And that is another important guiding principle, is to make sure that everybody has a voice in the process and has a chance to be heard. And we know in the mainstream systems, especially, the court system, it's really hard for the children, the youth, the First Nation, and the parents to be felt like they're being heard. You have a judge that's kind of sitting up at their area of the courtroom, and it's a very hierarchical process. You have legal counsel that are really the ones that are speaking, the lawyers in the room speaking to the judges and providing the information. And at times it doesn't seem like the family is being heard. The children are being heard, the youth are being heard in that kind of process. And we really want to make sure that our circle process is a different way for our people, and to make sure that everyone has a voice, including those children and those youth. So it's more of a wraparound support. It's a blanket almost wrapping around to support children, youth, and families. And we want it to be a safe space, right? Where they feel comfortable and connected and supported. And this really provides a chance for those families to try to resolve the disputes or the challenges that they're facing with an agency, with the First Nation, with an elder, with all of those supports wrapped around that family to help them.
So I understand that the Anishinaabeg Nation child well-being law is an important part of the circle process. But can you explain a context of what this child well-being law is for people who may not have heard of it or would like to understand what this is?
Right. So the Anishinaabeg Nation child well-being law, the direction to start that process, it came long before I was at the Anishinaabeg Nation. So it's been a long time coming. My understanding is that the direction, what came from the Child Wellbeing Working Group or the chiefs to develop the Child Wellbeing Law, to ensure that we have a law and system to support our children, youth, and families that's culturally appropriate to our Anishinaabe children, youth, and families. And the mainstream laws, which, the Child and Youth Family Services Act, that's a mainstream Ontario provincial law, but it really isn't in any way culturally appropriate to our people. And we know that we have our own legal principles and our own legal traditions and how we care for our children, our families, and that's not represented in any way in the mainstream legal realm. And so that's where our leadership had directed that we develop our own law for our own people.
So, say in one of the Anishinaabeg Nation communities is implementing this law, our Anishinaabeg Nation child well-being law within a First Nation, does the provincial law still apply within our community?
What it states within the law, our law, the Anishinaabeg Nation child well-being law, is that so the law it's more of a broad, higher level. It doesn't go into specific details necessarily, because once a First Nation decides to adopt the Anishinaabeg Nation child well-being law, what happens is they develop their own standards. They're called community standards, and how they're going to implement the law in their own community in detail. And that's how it's very flexible and culturally appropriate to that First Nation, right? Is how they're going to take the child well-being law and implement it in their own community based on their own standards, their own principles about how they support their children and families. And so if there is some sort of conflict between the child well-being law and those standards that a First Nation has developed and a provincial standard or a provincial law, our law says that our law supersedes the provincial law or any other laws, the federal law. We have a new federal child welfare law, C-92. It's also referred to as, and so our law would supersede those laws. That's what it's meant to be.
Okay. When I was at the Kogonasawin meeting a few weeks ago, that when we first had our opportunity to meet in person, I guess it's important that having our Anishinaabeg child well-being law is expressing our inherent right to be responsible for our families and communities.
Exactly. And we've never relinquished our inherent rights to do that. And so that's where our law superseding any other provincial or federal laws, that's where it comes from. We have those inherent rights that are inherent to our communities that were never relinquished. And we never gave up those rights to govern our own ways of approaching child and family well-being. And so that's a crucial part of our law for sure.
The development and implementation of the Circle process was endorsed by the Anishinaabeg Nation Chiefs in Assembly in 2019. As part of Resolution number 2019-04, the Legal Department and Social Department were directed to collaborate to secure funding from the provincial and federal governments for the training of facilitators and implementation of the Anishinaabeg Nation Circle process. At this same assembly, the Chiefs and Council also passed the Anishinaabeg Nation Children and Youth Bill of Rights. After the break, we'll hear more about the Circle process facilitators, the in-depth training that's been developed for everyone working within the Circle process, as well as how it's hoped that this process can benefit Anishinaabeg Nation children, youth, and families. The Survivor Circle for Reproductive Justice has supports available for Indigenous survivors of forced and coerced sterilization. Join the National Registry and access up to $70,000 in healing support funds for individuals, families, and communities. Deadline to apply is March 31st. Have you experienced forced sterilization or know someone who has? Please call 1-877-386-0750 or visit reproductivejusticesurvivors.ca for more information.
You mentioned some people who might be involved in the process. Who else who really would be in the room available to help or as a resource to assist?
Right. So the way that we received guidance to develop the process was to make sure that we have what we would call circle process facilitators in each of our regions. And so we have the Northern Superior region, the Lake Huron region, our Southeast region, and our Southwest region. And the Anishinaabeg Nation covers quite an expansive geography across Ontario, and we have 39 First Nations all across Ontario. And although we share our Anishinaabe culture and ways, there's still a lot of diversity between our First Nations that needs to be respected. And so we heard that we should have a circle process facilitator within each region. And what their role would be is to really become trained and engaged in the circle process and how to facilitate the circle process for the children, the youth, the families, the First Nations that are going to be involved in the circle process. And so they would have all of the knowledge and the expertise about the circle process and how to implement it and how to set it up, how to actually do a circle process and make sure that's happening. What they also have to do, and that's a key part of the circle process, is not only do they have to involve the family, but they also have to involve the First Nation. And that's a key aspect. And that's the way that we can make sure that the culture is there, the connection to the First Nation is there. So, for example, the facilitator may reach out to the First Nations band representative or someone similar that's involved with the First Nation and bring them into the circle process, as well as an elder from the First Nation. So the way that it was set up is to try to have an elder from each First Nation appointed to a roster of elders that we have for the circle process. And that way, if there is an issue that comes up and a circle process is held, the facilitator can reach out to this roster of elders, and it might be elder from that First Nation that's involved. And that way, the family and the First Nation feel comfortable that they have, an elder that they know. And that's voluntary as well, and it's flexible. If they want another elder, they can ask for those things. And then how it's also got to have follow-up. We heard the follow-up to, you can't just have a circle process, a circle happen, and then that's it, boom, it's done. There's got to be follow-up that happens with the children, youth, and families to make sure that, is the resolution that the family and those in the circle planned, is it actually working for them? Do we need to come back and hold another circle to help out with some issues that may not be working out? Or so the follow-up is really important as well. And we heard that from the working group. But out of the circle process, it's really the family and those that are involved that come up with the plan, right? The plan that how are they going to support the children and youth that are involved? And that plan might be involving referral to other services. For example, like maybe there's some mental health or addictions challenges that a parent or a family member is facing, and they may need supports for that. And the circle process can, as part of the plan that comes out of it, have the First Nation rep or the prevention worker or someone else that's involved make sure that they are providing supports or referrals for that family member.
Okay.
It's very broad. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't know what the outcomes of the circle process plans would be because that's something that's going to be created by those that are in the circle process. And we have to be open to all kinds of possibilities for what the supports would be. But that is one of the key aspects of making sure that there's follow-up, that those supports are provided and any referrals are followed up. And there would be circles that would be held as follow-up circles as well to check in.
You mentioned that the Anishinaabeg Nation is providing training for this circle process. Can you tell me a little about this training?
Right. So, yeah, I'd mentioned the Child Wellbeing Working Group. They were adamant that there needs to be some very intensive training for those that are involved in the circle process and organizing the circle process. So, for example, anybody that's facilitators and also any of the folks that would be coming in to be on the roster of facilitators that have expressed interest in being part of the circle process and helping, they've received this intensive training as well. I think what I recall is when the training is implemented, all of the content of the training ends up working out to be about 2 weeks in length. And it includes a lot of different aspects. So, for example, very in-depth and Anishinaabe focused training to learn about what a circle process is and what is involved with our circle process. And there's many steps. So if you look deeper, there was a toolkit that was developed for the circle process, and it explains all the aspects of how the circle process proceeds from the beginning of a request that comes in right to the circle process happening, and then maybe there's follow-up circles and the final closing of a file, for example, a circle process, the end of the process, right? And so the facilitators would have to, anybody involved, even the elders that are involved, would come to learn and be trained in all of those steps. And that was important. Learning about the sacred teachings around our circles, learning about our Anishinaabe teachings, cultural competencies. There would be training, of course, on the Anishinaabeg Nation Child Wellbeing Law and what's involved with that and how that's implemented within the communities that have adopted that. There would be training as well on those mainstream systems that we had talked about, the Provincial Child Youth Family Services Act, the federal C-92, and we want to make sure our facilitators and our elders that are working in the circle have knowledge of that terminology and those processes. So there would be training on that. There would be training as well on general dispute resolution techniques. There would be mental health and the circle. And there was a lot of really great advice that we received on what types of mental health sorts of training. Mental health first aid, I think, was the term that was used. So we made sure to be inclusive of that in the training. Involving children in the circle process was a key aspect of the training. Our facilitators would need to have the training to be able to know how to involve those children and youth in the circle, whether it be indirectly or directly, or how to go about those types of things. And so there would be training provided on that. There would be training on addressing difficult and high conflict situations where, for example, a family member or parent might be incarcerated. How do you approach a circle, involve a parent? Because you have to involve those parents, right? And so how do you approach that and involve that parent in the circle process, even though they may be incarcerated? There might be situations, very difficult situations where there might be abuse that's happened or those kinds of scenarios, a death that has happened. And so those are very, I think, extreme situations, but we wanted to make sure that we had some guidance and expertise and training provided to any of our facilitators to be able to handle those kinds of situations. If that's where the circle process was needed, we have to be able to provide that support, right? And so there would be a piece of training for sure on those kinds of circumstances and how to handle those. Also, self-care and personal healing. We heard that there needs to be training provided on that for anybody that's involved in the circle process, because there can be some very challenging issues that could be brought to the circle process. And so the working group made it very clear that we need to have some training for the staff and those that are working in the circle process on self-care and personal healing to make sure that they're in a good place to be able to bring those supports to the children, youth, and families and to carry on with that. And then at the end of the training, all of that training, there would be a circle process simulation that happens. And so there would be a scenario that is presented to those being trained, and they would go through the steps of developing a circle process for that type of scenario. So a lot of training, and we heard from the working group that all of these pieces were needed for the training for anybody working in the circle process.
Yeah, that sounds very detailed, and it's covering a lot of aspects required for building the skills of those who are going to take part in the training and making sure there's a really broad understanding of what this process involves. So the process has already begun, the training and the recruiting and everything.
Yes.
So how could families, communities request a circle?
So if any family or community or anybody else that might see a need for having this circle process for some of the issues that they're facing with child and youth and family well-being, if they want to reach out and find out more and learn more about the process and how it can be implemented for them, they just reach out to circle.process@anishinaabeg.ca, and we will get back to them and start that conversation.
Miigwech. Well, in closing, Leanna, how can this circle process benefit Anishinaabe Nation children, youth, and families?
Yes, I believe there is a great need for a process like this in our Anishinaabe First Nations. We know how the mainstream processes are not working for our children, youth, and families. It's a scary space sometimes, especially in child protection, for our families to use those mainstream processes. There's a lot of distrust with mainstream processes, and it's not a voluntary process. And if it's not a voluntary and culturally appropriate process, is it really working to help our children, youth, and families overcome the challenges that they're facing? And we know mainstream processes do not help with really supporting the needs of our children, youth, and families. So I think we've heard that there's a need for our own system and our own circle process. And, when we were doing the engagements about the development of this circle process with our child wellbeing working group, we had heard comments that this is not an alternative dispute resolution process. This is our dispute resolution process. And so from that sort of comment, you can hear loud and clear that there is a need for our own circle process for our communities and for our children, youth, and families. Like I mentioned earlier, it would be really a support. It's there for support, and it could be there, even before there's a protection issue involved. And if there's a family that's struggling, that's what this process is there for, and to provide the supports to that family where they feel they have the trust in the process and the people that are involved in the process. They have the support of elders, for example, ceremony, anything that they need to feel supported and cared for. That's what this process is really there to provide. And I think that was one of the main, our legal traditions in child and youth well-being inherently was that we will do whatever we need to do to provide support and love and caring for our children, youth, families. It was a community. The community cared for the children, right? And the youth. And I think that comes out in this circle process, is that it really is there to make our children, youth, and our families feel loved and cared for and supported.
Miigwech, Leanna Farr, for really sharing and explaining how this Anishinaabeg Nation's circle process works. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Miigwech to Leanna Farr for taking part in the podcast, and to the Anishinaabeg Nation Social Development Department for supporting this episode. To learn more about the Anishinaabeg Nation Circle process, and to listen to our other podcasts about Kōkanosawan, find the links in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Brothers by Wolf Saga and Chippewa Travelers, and Just Us by Wolf Saga and David R. Miracle, licensed by Nagamo Publishing, and Easy Lemon by Kevin MacLeod. Chimigwech for listening to Bamadzajay Ganonandwa. Until next time, Bama P.